I'm the Dean of Law and Social Sciences here. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening and also to thank the London Middle East Institute for its kindness in helping this event to take place. Next week, same time, same place, same topic on Libya. George Joffe from University of Cambridge will be coming down to talk to the London Middle East Institute on the Libyan issue. And I'm sure that those of you with an interest in this subject will be able to find that very interesting as well. But it's my great pleasure tonight to introduce to you someone who made his reputation as a considerable scholar, an ecumenical scholar, someone who was Western educated, has a Canadian PhD, but has also spent some time studying at the Gregorian University in the Vatican in Rome, and is one of the leading ecumenical scholars in the Middle East today. However, when the Libyan uprising began, he was one of the key and first people to take part, and played a key role in the operational planning and the stabilization efforts to create the start of a new Libyan state. He's here tonight on private business. He's visiting London and Cambridge on scholarly business, but he kindly consented to give this public address, which is therefore not Aref speaking in any official capacity, but is able to speak to you in a personal capacity and to offer personal reflections on what's happening in Libya now and what might happen in the future. He's currently the ambassador of Libya to the United Arab Emirates, but maintains a major role in terms of the operational planning for a new government and a new dispensation in Libyan society back home in Libya itself. And he's been very, very close to events, as I said, from the very beginning of the uprising, diplomatically, operationally, and in terms of trying to keep the entire effort a united effort. So we were able to persuade him, in addition to coming here tonight, to address a very small and private study group at Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, this afternoon, where there was a very, very different audience of retired ambassadors and retired political figures and business people of one stripe or another. And I think that what Aref wants to do tonight is to pick up where he left off this afternoon, where he was talking about the disjunctures in Libyan society today, the intense competition between those who took part in a genuine popular movement and whether or not that genuine popular movement is in danger of being captured by, let us say, professional revolutionaries, and whether or not the amount of money that is now being transacted in Libya, the amount of liquidity that's now entering the country, rather than helping to rebuild the country, is in fact being used instead to build factions within the country, acting as forces of divisiveness rather than as forces of unity. And of course, there are the very, very vexed problems of how do we make things work? What is the role of the National Transitional Committee? What is the role of the government? How transitional can they be? Can they do anything? Should they do anything before elections take place? What kinds of elections? Underneath what kind of constitution? If they choose to do nothing now, because they don't want to prejudice a future elected government, can a vacuum in decision-making be allowed to exist? Will this vacuum only encourage the consolidation of factions who will then make life very, very difficult for any new government in Libya? So the problems facing the new country are immense. And I don't think that we could have anybody better to start discussing these things with you than Dr. Aref Nayed. As I say, a considerable scholar. He's turned into a considerable diplomat and political figure in Libya, but is here tonight, as I say, to talk to you in his private capacity. And in that private capacity, I think you will find that he's prepared to talk very honestly to you. So thank you very much.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Stephen, for the introduction. And thank you very much to SOAS for hosting me here and for your generosity of your time to share with this humble soul a few observations about my beloved country. I do theology and a bit of philosophy, and I would like to say a few theological things to begin with, and then maybe we can get on with politics to some extent. For years, I've felt that the most important task for a Muslim theologian today would be the articulation of a theology of compassion, on the basis of which a compassionate preaching of Islam can take place and a compassionate sharing with people of other faiths be possible. This theology of compassion, which tries to be the foundation for a preaching of compassion, I still hold to be quite vital. Unfortunately, in the Arab Spring, and I actually don't like to use that word in the singular. I like to speak in the terms of Arab Springs in the plural. The discourse of compassion is actually, I believe, too absent. I believe that when young people went out there to revolt against Gaddafi and against Mubarak and against Zayn al-Abidin, they did so in search for a much better world, a compassionate world. And I believe that the revolt was not just against particular persons, but it was actually against tyranny, but also cruelty, and against corruption. And I think that we've had different degrees of success in the various Arab Springs in the fight against these three things. Sometimes because it was a fight, especially in Libya, there was a lot of fighting. There's been a lot of cruelty in the very search for freedom and for democracy and for a better world. And I'm afraid that because of the fight, there's necessarily mobilization of a fighting spirit. And one of the biggest challenges right now is to mobilize a spirit of love and compassion, and to try to build a country based on love and forgiveness. And it's mighty difficult because the very mobilization process that was necessary to fight a very hard fight now is a hindrance to the mobilization of better feelings and human values like love and forgiveness and compassion and reconciliation. So I don't think that we can say that our revolution, at least in Libya, is a success unless we can overcome tyranny with genuine democracy and overcome cruelty with genuine compassion and overcome corruption with genuine transparency and fairness and cleanliness in all transactions, governmental or business. I'm afraid that while it does look like we've succeeded, because Gaddafi has been removed and now we do have a new situation, I believe that our success is only partial because I still see a lot of tyranny in us, in Libya. And I believe that the most difficult idols to destroy are the idols within our own hearts. And I think that we can be tyrannical in our attitudes and in our heart towards our colleagues who fought with us for freedom, and ironically become tyrannical in our very fight against tyranny. I believe also that we are very limited in our success in the fight against cruelty because, as I say, the fight itself involved a lot of cruelty. And also what I'm seeing now, and this has been pointed out by some very disturbing recent reports by human rights activists and groups, the fact is that there is still cruelty in Libya, and there is cruelty and torture in some holding facilities that are illegal in the real sense. They're not under the Ministry of Justice, and there is still a lot of cruelty. And in the fight against corruption, I think that we are also very limited in our success, and that some of the most corrupt government officials whose salaries is supposed to be 1,000 dinars a month, and who own billions of dollars and euros overseas and billions of dinars in the country, have managed to a rather disturbing degree to re-polish themselves and even get religious preachers to sing their praise on television that they own, and that this corrupt clique is making a comeback to steal yet again under democratic guise. So I think that we have very limited success in that as well. I don't want to paint a bleak picture or to in any way belittle the great success of the Libyan people in overcoming a vicious system of Gaddafi, but I think that we'll be fooling ourselves if we think that we've completely succeeded. And I believe that unless we are able to overcome tyranny and cruelty and corruption, young people will again and again, feeling frustrated, will revolt again. And one very striking thing about Libyan youth and youth in other countries, of course, is the incredible intelligence and the know-how that they have, and the fact that they cannot be fooled anymore. And if you look at Facebook and you look at the social media traffic, it is very clear that young people today do recognize that there is still tyranny, that there is still cruelty, and that there is still corruption. And I predict that these young people will not only take to the street once again, as they have done recently in Benghazi and in Tripoli and in Misrata and in various other towns, but they may actually resort to even more drastic actions in the near future if we do not very seriously address these great grievances that were the cause of all problems in the first place. Part of the reason these things are not being addressed properly is a very weird phenomenon that Hannah Arendt explains in the end of her book on revolution, which one of my friends, rather than grassroots communal associations in the form of local councils. And she points this out in the Hungarian Revolution and also in the Russian Revolution, when the Soviets were very early on kind of stolen by the Bolshevik party. And I was reading this and thinking that in many ways the same thing is happening in Libya to some extent. And maybe this is part of the reason we're not able to address the grievances, the three grievances that I mentioned in the beginning, in any drastic way or in any thorough way. When this revolution began, what I take to be an actual divine miracle happened, and that is that Libyans had consensus on the National Transitional Council and its head Mustafa Al-Jalil against all odds. If someone were to ask me that Libyans would agree on anything at that point, I would have considered that to be impossible. But in a very short period of time, there was consensus on supporting the National Transitional Council and Mustafa Al-Jalil. And it was that consensus, fragile as it was, that enabled the country to go forward and enabled Libya to have a legitimate partner in dialogue with international friends and partners. Very interestingly, early on, people pointed out that the National Transitional Council was a bit too Eastern, that there weren't enough seats in it, and that the seats were mainly taken by Eastern-based tribes and persons. And very early on in our discussions with international partners, it was pointed out that there wasn't enough representation from the West, the center, and the south of the country. Whereupon the group that was helping the executive team at the time, helping Dr. Mahmoud Jibril, we had a support team, and there was a coordinator of the support offices for the executive team. We decided that we must locate and find local council representation from all over the country and consolidate them and bring them together to Benghazi to express support for the National Council and to fill some of the seats in the National Transitional Council. And we did succeed with great difficulty, but with the great help of volunteers from all over Libya. We managed, there were about 70 volunteers or so. we managed to pull together a rather convincing group of people coming from the south, the center, and the west. And we arranged through kind Emirati help to bring them to Abu Dhabi, and then through kind Qatari help to bring them to Doha, and then to take them to Benghazi. And in Benghazi, they declared allegiance and support of the National Transitional Council, and a good number of them remained to fill the seats in the National Transitional Council. And our team is very honored to see many of those people that came during that journey to still be in the National Transitional Council, and also to see some of them having made it to governmental positions. When the team organized that, I believe that it was a spectacular success for that time, for the task at hand. Unfortunately, since liberation, there was supposed to be an expansion of this group, and there was supposed to be a replacement of key personalities in that group. Now that cities were free and could send their proper representatives, chosen through popular selection or choice, be it elections or kind of popular local consensus. That didn't happen, and with only a few exceptions, the council remained roughly the same size, and very few changes happened. The local councils began to lose their importance to some extent in people's eyes, and people focused at the national level and what's going to happen with the elections and the election law, and what will happen for the eventual election of the assembly of 200 and so on. And I believe that negligence of the local councils was really a big mistake. If you look at the news about Libya, you find very little talk about the local councils since the coverage that gathering had in Abu Dhabi, Doha, and Benghazi. There is very little talk about what's happening at the local council level, and I believe that that's a key mistake, not paying attention to these developments, because a lot cannot be understood without understanding the dynamics of what's happening at the local level. I believe that a surer road towards democracy would have been possible if we paid more attention to the local councils, and if we asked for elections at the local council level immediately after liberation, so that we can populate the General Assembly or the National Transitional Council itself, to expand it through membership of people who are duly elected locally. And because of this, we now have a very fragile National Transitional Council that is not nearly as democratically chosen or elected as has to be, with a limited size and limited expertise, having to carry the country forward in a period that's actually extended for several months. Yes, there is now a transitional government, but the transitional government, because of the process of how it was selected, and also difficulties of the alienation of authorities between it and the council, and also funding issues and the control of funding, also is a fragile political entity. So now we have this very strange situation of a very fragile structure, or a couple of fragile structures, having to cope with very heavy duties without the necessary electoral legitimacy, and having to cover a few very critical months in very difficult circumstances, with lots of arms being spread throughout the country, and lots of groupings having developed. So I believe that Hannah Arendt was right to say that the local councils were very important for developing what Jefferson would call little republics that are distributed and that come together in a political body that is truly democratic. And I also see the alarming emergence of professional revolutionaries who are trying to replace the local councils through two mechanisms. One of them is trying to dominate particular local councils, especially the Council of Tripoli. And there was, in recent weeks, huge fights on the Facebook and also in what's called Algeria Square, including the storming of the local council, precisely because of the problematic of representation at the local council level, and the struggle between the local council or more precisely, local councils throughout Tripoli, and the local council that is dominated by a particular political party or tendency. So this is already happening, and a further alarming phenomenon is the alliance of some of these professional revolutionaries in various areas of Libya with a religious scholarly direction that is trying to basically monopolize religious legitimacy with some very polluted money supporting some of these preachers and giving them access to subsidized television stations and so on. So it gets very complicated. I do believe that the revolution is in real danger of being hijacked by these cliques and these professional revolutionaries, as Aref called them, and that the local councils are not getting enough of a hearing and are not getting enough attention, neither locally nor internationally. This is leading to a very precarious situation where people are feeling robbed and feeling cheated. And I think that explains the weird violence that we've seen in Benghazi recently with the attack on the National Transitional Council itself, and some of the local attacks on the local Tripoli Council, and even the Beni Walid incident, which is not at all pro-Gaddafi versus anti-Gaddafi forces, but is very much local council pre-liberation versus local council post-liberation, with some complicated tribal and clan, sprinkles of that as well. So it's what I'm trying to say is that some of these conflicts that we're seeing do form a pattern, and one way of understanding their motivations and reasons is to think of two things. Think of the great intentionalities of the revolution that are not reached, and these I mentioned in the beginning, the overcoming of tyranny, the overcoming of the second one, cruelty, and the overcoming of corruption. I think there is a notion, like there is a feeling of unfulfilled intentionality, and that's very frustrating for young people. And the second thing is the fact that the local councils have not had their due respect and attention and further development. We are seeing very complicated local politics and struggle. Meanwhile, the attention of the intellectual discussion, political discussion, is on the election law and on the future of the constitution and so on, which are very important questions. But I think that you need to address the two sets first in order to be able to go forward. So I foresee that we will continue to have difficulties. Again, I think I do have great hope in the young people of Libya. I think just as they've overcome this almost impossible situation of Gaddafi's tyranny before, I think they will overcome all difficulties. But I'm afraid it's not going to be pleasant unless we can talk about these issues publicly and can address these issues in open discussion. And unfortunately, this open discussion is not happening enough, and it's not happening publicly enough. There isn't enough public debate. People complain about too many voices being expressed in Libya, and I think we shouldn't complain about that. What we should complain about is that these voices, or this polyphony, to use Bakhtin's terminology, is not being consolidated through a public debate in a public sphere that is open for everyone, so that a national vision and discourse can emerge out of this very complex symphony of voices. And sometimes people, when they have all these complex voices, long for the single voice that they were used to in the past. And but as soon as anybody tries to speak with a single voice, people get scared because it sounds like Gaddafi trying to dictate things with a centralized command and control model. So when there is a single voice, people object, and when there is a multiple voices, a set of voices, people object. And what we need to do is to get a listening to the multiplicity of voices. And this is not going to happen unless the local councils in their emergence are respected and can be consolidated together in a grander assembly. So I'm afraid it's going to be a painful process unless we can somehow maybe open this discussion up and get things going. And one key factor in getting the discussion going is to settle a very, very important stumbling block issue, I think. And that is the issue of religious legitimacy. As you well know, there's a debate on Islam and Sharia and the way some of the Islamist politicians like to portray it is that, well, look, Libya is a Muslim country, we're all Muslims, so if you want Islam, then you have to be with us. And if you don't want to be with us, then you are a secular. And there are already pamphlets on universities being distributed in universities in which it is said that to vote for a secularist or Almani, as they say, is a form of haram or forbidden action. This is actually quite alarming. It's very strange, but the Muslim scholars who are duly authorized according to the tradition, the Azhari types, the old venerable sages and scholars of Libya, in many ways their voices are not heard, and the religious voice is actually being monopolized by certain politicized Islam, and even in the case of the Grand Mufti and the Minister of the Awqaf, it's definitely a definitive school within Malikism, a kind of a Salafi Malikism that's in association with political Islam that is having the platform, while the old religious scholars are not getting enough of a hearing, so that even assemblies of ulama were highly non-representative and skewed in their representation. There are people working on this. We had early in the revolution formed something which was called the Network of Free Ulama, and that network, together with Sufi networks, are consolidating what is called the Association of Muslim Ulama, Rabitat Ulama Libya, and this hopefully this will consolidate into a scholarly group that will not use religion against one party or the other, but actually make a point of letting God be God, as Barth would say, and forbidding political parties from utilizing religion as a tool against each other. So there should be a non-political, non-partisan, religious legitimacy body that should actually, if there's something to forbid, it's this cheap use of religiosity to attack other parties. And unless this happens, we will have a skewed discussion, and the issues regarding the Constitution and the Sharia and the Constitution and so on will definitely be a very distorted discourse. So I see that as very important, and as a kind of a framework, a kind of a moral code of not using God against each other, and also the paying attention to the local councils as key to the emergence of true democracy in Libya. I'm afraid we have not completed the cycle of revolution. Maybe we had the revolution one, but unless the grievances that I talked about in the beginning, tyranny, cruelty, and corruption are addressed, and unless locality and the grassroots is paid attention to, we do have a very serious risk of people feeling robbed of their own accomplishments and maybe taking a second go at revolution. I believe that stability in Libya, as I believe all stability, is a gift from God. It is I was looking for words in Arabic for stability. There is istiqrar, but I think it's better to speak of sakina or the sakhina in the Torah and is well known in medieval literature. And I believe that this divine gift of peace is a form of divine compassion, and I believe that divine compassion is triggered through mutual compassion and through mutual love. So I would like to come back to this theological, spiritual theme of love. Unless we stop trying to cheat each other by using God against each other, And unless we stop being cruel to each other, and unless we call a spade and face corruption, it's absolutely ludicrous to see a Muslim preacher on television sing the praise of a well-known thief in Libya. And that has happened already. And people are not stupid. And unless we're able to make sure that religiosity is truly prophetic and truly genuine in fostering a spirit of fairness and love and being against tyranny and against cruelty and against corruption, I don't think that we will have the stabilization that we seek. So am I pessimistic or optimistic? I think I am optimistic. I believe that one has to be. I believe that the three virtues that the medievals talked about, faith, hope, and charity, are the roadmap to stability in not only Libya but across the region and other countries. And I believe that it is feasible to build a great country, but I think that we have a long way to go. And it will be a huge mistake to think that we've killed tyranny just by killing Gaddafi. I think that tyranny is within all of our hearts, and it's something that we have to overcome every day. And I think that to think that we've got rid of cruelty just because we got rid of the old torturers, we're kidding ourselves because there are new torturers. And I believe that to think that we've overcome corruption before we really face the realities, the ugly realities of the recent past of Libya, and come to terms with ourselves so that we have a cleaner country, I don't think that we will have democracy. So yes, we will have democracy, but it's not going to be easy, and we need each other to go forward, and we need your reflections and your advice, and we need to articulate as much as we can what it is that's going on, and this is just an attempt to articulate some of these things. Forgive me for the rambling. I'm awfully exhausted and confused and wounded in many ways. But this is the best that I can do, and I'm more than happy to hear your advice and guidance on the future of Libya.
He has flown more than 20 hours to get here, so we are going to open it up to questions now. If you could identify yourself and then ask your question, that would be very helpful.
Ahmed al-Shaybani, the founder of the first political party, the Democratic Party, post-Gaddafi dictatorial era. Many Libyans, they see you as an impediment, since you were appointed as an ambassador to United Arab Emirates, not out of the Libyan people's choice, but when your superior, Dr. Mahmoud Jibril was challenged on this, he said that the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates requested you in name. So to challenge this kind of corruption that you mentioned, I think we should start at home. Furthermore, our cyber rebels on our virtual platforms have posed many questions to you. What was the linkage between you and Tomorrow's Libya company that gave you an exclusive mandate to do their human training resources with Mahmoud Jibril Wafalli? You need to know that Wafalla tribe is castigated now, and it's harder for a camel to pass through an eye of a needle than Wafalla to reach high office.
Thank you. I think that we will answer that question first before going on to anyone else. They're pertinent questions, and Dr. Nayed is prepared to answer your question.
Let me drink first. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, Mr. Shaybani, I'm honored to meet you. I've read about your efforts and your party, and it's a great honor to meet you and to hear your voice. And I'll be very happy to address your concerns, which are legitimate concerns. Let me begin with the appointment. Okay. I was in the demonstration in Fashlum on the 19th of February. Came out of Libya on the 20th. Went to Turkey, tried to get some help from Turkey, and then went to Abu Dhabi and asked to meet Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed. I had never met Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed before, but a mutual friend managed to get me an appointment, and I explained to him the situation in Benghazi and appealed to him to help us. And I am very happy that, I'm not saying that it was only my advice, I'm sure that other people also advised him and that he reflected on this. But very early on, he did help. And the United Arab Emirates stance in the Council for Gulf States and in the Arab League was absolutely key to the success of the diplomatic effort. And we are grateful to the UAE for that. Okay? Now, I dare say that I began my involvement with the revolution by phoning Dr. Zahid Mghairbi and Dr. Najib Al-Hsadi in Benghazi before the council was formed. And as the professors of law and the lawyers were discussing what form of or structures we should have, I dare say that I did take part in that discussion over the phone through Dr. Zahid Mghairbi and Dr. Idris and various other people in Benghazi at the time. So my involvement with the National Transition Council was from its very inception and prior to the appointment of Dr. Mahmoud Jibril. Okay? I immensely respect Dr. Mahmoud Jibril. He is from the Urfalla tribe. I'm from the Urfalla tribe. He's from the Ziyadat sub-clan. I am from the Ziyadat sub-clan. But we meet together in the, I think, 9th grandfather. So to say that he's my cousin is true in Arabic, but not in English. The notion of cousin is quite okay. I very much respect him. When I first came out, I had a network of relationships with various academics and some governments because of about 20 years of work in interfaith. I used these contacts to the maximum. I emailed everybody that I could and built up a correspondence with various governments regarding Libya early on. So when Dr. Mahmoud Jibril was appointed in Decree number 2 of the National Transitional Council, I phoned him and I told him that I had made certain correspondences with foreign governments and that because he is now responsible for the foreign ministry, that I should give him these correspondences. And when I briefed him on what I did, he was appreciative and he asked me to help him out because he had very little help at the time. I did over the build up a formidable, I would say, group of young Libyans who've done all the work. All I did was coordinate between them to some extent. But about 70 young Libyans, men and women, helped the executive team and Mahmoud Jibril through in various ways, ranging from solving the fuel issue in Benghazi early on to issues with the TFM or the fund, the international fund, to sending secretarial support with missions of Dr. Isawi to Italy and other things that we did. Very mundane, small things. These were done by volunteers, including myself, and they did not cost the government anything whatsoever. So to say that Mahmoud Jibril appointed me or that that it was favoritism or that it was because I'm from his tribe is really not quite fair. Now, to say that the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates appointed me is also not fair because, as you know, ambassadors are appointed by their own government. But as you know, it's also true that in diplomacy, the host country has to accept the nomination. And the process of acceptance can take some time. So when the council when the United Arab Emirates recognized the council as the legitimate government of Libya, it was vital that an ambassador be appointed very early on, because at the time the recognition we had from the UAE was the highest form of recognition. They actually very early on recognized the council as the legitimate government of Libya, and we needed that for international discussions. So it was vital that we have an ambassador very quickly. And what Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed did, and that's all he did, was he told Mahmoud Jibril and Sheikh Mustafa Abdul Jalil that if you do send us Aref, who's been arranging all the meetings thus far with the United Arab Emirates, okay, we would accept it. That's what he said. And I was nominated, duly nominated by the council. My name was discussed in the council. It was agreed to in the council with its full. There was a discussion. There were some objections. They were overcome. And I was appointed as the ambassador. So I am honored to have had that appointment, but I made it very clear from the beginning that it is a volunteer appointment and that I would like to stop being the ambassador as soon as we have liberation. I've submitted my resignation 9 times thus far, and thus far they've been telling me to hold on until we send the replacement. I have not applied or taken a diplomatic passport. I have not changed my residence visa. It's still on my own company. I have not taken a single penny from the Libyan government. And I have not relocated to an ambassador's house. I'm still living in my own house. And I have told in no uncertain terms the government that I'm not interested in continuing this role. So I would like to assure you that none of what you think is regarding the appointment is as you think. Now, regarding the tomorrow's Libya and the training, I have no clue what you were talking about there. There is no such link. There has been a lot of stuff on Facebook saying that Mahmoud Jibril is my partner. He is not. My partner is a man from Misrata called Mun'im Hamad Bouhoud. He's been my partner for the last 14 years. He's my only partner ever. Okay, and I've never done any business transaction with Mahmoud Jibril or anybody else in the present or past government. I did not know any of the Gaddafi brothers except Muhammad Gaddafi because he tried to take away a contract from me and we had a bit of a fight. Okay, and I never met Saiful Islam Gaddafi. Okay, so none of the stuff that's on the Facebook is fair. I believe that the team that I led was subjected to deliberate attacks by certain parties, and even on television, a particular preacher made accusations, and I only had to say respectful things about him when I was interviewed. So I believe that that should address your second thing. Now, regarding the Warfalla tribe, with all due respect to you, the Warfalla is a big and I would say great tribe. It is like any tribe in Libya, has some good people, some bad people. It has a good track record and a bad track record. Okay, we can have a long discussion on which tribes helped whom, when, and we can go on for many hours. But I will not accept you insulting in any way the Warfalla tribe, just as I will not accept you insulting any Libyan tribe, be it Misrata or Zintan or anyone else. I believe that because of demography, unless you want to take away Libyan citizenship from the Warfalla tribe, which I don't think is feasible or anybody's right, you do have to live with them. And as a Warfalli, I am honored to live with you, no matter what you say about us or about me. And I believe that we must learn to respect each other. If you have grievances about particular Warfallis, then you should direct those grievances towards that person and use legal means to pursue them. And I will be the first to support you in such pursuit. And I very much respect your frankness and thank you for it. But I do also pray that you also hear me out and consider what I have just told you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it was a fair exchange on an issue which I now want to get away from. It was at a fair area, although it's given people a degree of insight into some of the complexities of debate in Libya. But to deal with issues more Libyan as we understand them here in the West. But I was recognizing this gentleman first.
My name is Abdulaziz Sawi. I'm Sudanese. And someone who comes from an essentially Arab country, not completely Arab country, and a Muslim country. I'm really happy to listen to what you have to say because these are our preoccupations of Arabs and Muslims. I mean, the same kind of problem, especially the problem of the position of Islam in the modern world and the conduction of democracy. I want especially to focus on the point of compassion in Islam. As we know, in Christianity, this happened when in association with the Enlightenment. I think our problem with Islam is that it is a pre-Enlightenment Islam. So it's very difficult to see how we can produce the kind of compassion coming from, especially from political Muslims and this kind of groups. I think this is the main problem. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take a second question so that Dr. Nayed can then answer small batches and perhaps a third. But the woman in the red jumper first and then the woman in front of her.
I'd like to ask about the economy and specifically about contracts with foreign companies. Will the contract made by the Gaddafi regime be honoured and what will happen to projects that have been started? And also, will you be diversifying away from oil and maybe developing into like tourism? Libyan immigrant heritage, but that can't be developed into security scope. So what are you doing about these issues?
Okay, then, yes.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Lima Sek and I'm a master's candidate here. So I have two questions for you. One of them is, what is the current security status in Libya and what is the transitional government doing to address the security problems? And number two, how is the current government going to mitigate this current situation in Libya in a way that it does not fall in a failed state status like Somalia has with its transitional government?
Now, regarding, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Sawi, and I take it that you're from the great Sawi family that's produced many theologians and commentators. No? Okay. But what you say about compassion in Islam is absolutely important. Compassion is so central to Islam. It is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You have the Quran is called Hudan wa Rahma. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is called Rahman Muhda. And yet it's so conspicuously absent from the discourse. You can read many books about Islam and the politics of Islam without referring to compassion as if it's too mushy of a concept to form the basis of political discourse. I believe that, and I was saying this in Benghazi recently, that the biggest crisis we have is a crisis of compassion and a crisis of more moral conduct. And without it, you cannot have proper politics. There is a need for a meta-political discourse that works at the axiological level or the ethical level that should be the foundation for more detailed or more applied politics. Now, what you say about the Enlightenment, I'm not so sure, because I believe that it's actually the opposite. That in the pre-Enlightenment discourse, compassion was there even in late Muslim literature. I'm thinking even up to the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. It is with the discourse of Enlightenment and more precisely with modernity that you get a more kind of engineering-like Islam that thinks of problem solving and the notion that Islam is the solution as a like a problem solving methodology. And with this enlightenment / modernity, things like love, things like communion with other people in the community through compassion and mutual respect and love do not get emphasized. In the European Enlightenment, you have two types of Enlightenment discourses. Some of it is very cold and calculating, rationalistic kind of Enlightenment. And then you get the pietist version of Enlightenment, something like the Kantian critique of pure reason and the notions of the categorical imperative and the dignity of the person as person and distinction of person from thing. This kind of Enlightenment discourse with its pietistic streak is actually very similar to pre-modern Islamic theological discourses. So it's actually a rather complex matter. And we need to also look at the Enlightenment, how it happened in Egypt, the school of Attar, the school of Tahtawi. So I wouldn't put it so in such a polar manner. I think it's much more complex. Now, regarding the economy, will the contracts be honored? The position of the government has been consistently that legal, proper contracts will be honored. What that means, and will there be investigations of bad contracts, is a complex issue. I am speaking here in my personal capacity. My personal opinion that proper contracts should be honored and that all contracts should be reviewed at some level. And the best kind of review, I think, is self-review. I believe that during the Gaddafi era, and especially during the last 10 years of Saif al-Islam-driven so-called reforms, there's been a lot of highway robbery in contracting. And if actually you want to honor all the contracts that Saif's circle signed, you probably exhaust all the billions of dollars that are said to be in Libyan reserves. So you get things like airports with 4 times the benchmark for square footage. You get things that double and triple the prices. And I think it's extremely important that everyone comes that we're seeing in this revolution is that some of the most corrupt governmental officials are now owning television stations and are coming back as great supporters of some political speaks. So there is a long way to go, and it is only with that kind of frankness that Mr. Shaybani exhibited here, and I'm very grateful to him, that we must talk frankly and open our books. I had said in a television interview, I have archives for 15 years of business activities, and I'll be very happy to open them to inspection by the government. And I think that we should all come forward and be open to that kind of scrutiny and demand transparency of each other. So I think foreign companies also have to consider their past ways, and in those cases where they were embezzled or where certain officials forced them into paying things, they should come forward and say, Mr. So-and-so, who was the head of this entity, did this and that. And I think there should be a mechanism for this. How it can be done is a complicated issue. I think that needs further discussion. But I don't believe that we should simply honor everything, because some of it is really, really dubious. At the same time, I don't think that governments should wiggle away out of contractual obligations. That would be a very bad thing for the integrity of the country and its credit rating and everything else. So now, regarding the security, if you consider the size of Libya, if you consider the extent of the violence that was involved in this conflict, if you consider the diversity of tribes and clans and backgrounds and towns and regions and so on, what we have in Libya today is a security miracle in many ways. You can live in Tripoli and go about your business and have cappuccinos and eat and so on. I mean, it is secure, and you can travel across the country in security. Is it totally secure? Of course not. Will there be some flare-ups of violence here and there? Yes, there will be. But the more we respect the local councils, the more there is discussion with the local councils, the more there is integration of these military local councils with the national army and the national police, the more peace we will have. But if you look at post-conflict cases in other countries, I think Libya is doing remarkably well. And sometimes people think that stabilization has to do with monopoly of power and centralization. I believe that Libya has achieved what it has achieved in terms of stability is precisely through distribution or massive parallelism of structures. Because the weapons are widely spread, because no one has monopoly over power, things balance them out in many ways. This is not to say that we should be content with the situation. We should have a program for securing these weapons and disarming, but it has to be a gradual process and a parallel process, so that you don't end up with one tribe owning the power or one political party owning the power, so that we will have balance of power throughout. I believe that we need to develop structures of stabilization or stabilization models that do not necessarily depend on central command and control. But this is something that maybe we can discuss further.
I'm going to take another float of 3 questions from now. This gentleman here has come up for a long time. That gentleman there, this lady here.
My name is Yusuf Fernandez. I'm editor of Islamico.org, a Muslim website. I would like to ask you twice 2 things about Islam. First, if you think that Salafism will impose as the dominant trend in Libya now after the revolution. And the second, I was in Libya twice during Gaddafi's time because we were invited by the World Islamic Society. We visited the headquarters in Tripoli. They were a big institution. They brought students from many countries with scholarships. I would like to know if do you think that in the future this institution will survive or that will be dissolved after Gaddafi's time? That's it.
This gentleman here, please.
My name is Aref. I'm a Libyan foreign writer, and feeling privileged to see you here. Thank you for your explanation. I've got 2 points. The first point is that my point of view is that our problem now is the youth people who toppled Gaddafi are now having the feeling of not being heard, not being in the government, not being just, they feel that the youth people who do the revolution and the elderly jump on it. This is what we feel. This is my first point. And the second point is that what do you think about the new electoral law? And especially after the multiple amendments that have been made now. Thank you very much.
And the final one in this round, yes, our colleague here, please.
Villa Benamar from France. Well, I would like to come back to the issue of arms. It seems that one of the main issues threatening the region is in the post-Gaddafi's era is the proliferation of arms in the region and among the armed groups. So, how the current government is dealing with this issue?
Now, the question regarding will Salafism and will it dominate Libyan society? Salafism, as you know, is a very complex phenomenon. It has many schools, sub-schools, and various tendencies. And nearly all of those tendencies are represented in Libya today. This has to do with historical factors. Returnees from the United States and other countries where Salafism was propagated in mosques, the return of many people who studied in Saudi Arabia, the propagation of CDs and tapes and so on. So it's a complex history. And it has to do with the gap that was created by the Gaddafi regime when he exercised something which he called the Cultural Revolution, in which the institutions of religious teaching were destroyed in Libya. So thereby creating a gap that was filled by various tendencies that were not really known to Libya before. Libya is historically Ash'ari in Aqidah, Maliki in jurisprudence, and Sufi in tendency, with the exception of the Ibadi madhab in the Nafusa Mountains, in some of the towns and tribes of Nafusa Mountain. And that was the historical balance. This has changed through, as I say, these changes in the late 70s and 80s and 90s. And there is a sizable influence of Salafism in the country. Interestingly, some of them actually sided with Gaddafi and declared that there should be no rebellion against him. And these are more of the Madkhali type of Salafism. And some sided with the more jihadist streaks and also the Muslim Brotherhood and fought quite courageously against Gaddafi. And the dynamics between these two types of Salafism is quite complex, and even in each side there is a complex subset of subsets and so on. So I believe that the tradition of the country, the Ash'arism and the Malikism and the Sufism, is most worthy of not only attention but development and articulation. That's the school I belong to. And the part of Salafism that warns people of not worshipping or warns them against not worshipping things other than God is something that I appreciate and can understand. But the blowing up of tombs, for example, that's happened over the past couple of months is totally unacceptable. Not only because it's theologically and juridically wrong, but I believe the most dangerous thing about it is that somebody is imposing their religious opinion using bombs, and that is not something that is conducive to building a democracy. So I will do my utmost to make sure that the tradition of the country is preserved. I played an important role with a great team of students and other teachers of renovating and restarting teaching the Ottoman madrasa, and we do intend to continue the tradition, inshallah. But it's going to be, I don't think anybody will have monopoly on the religious discourse. It will have to be in discussion with the Salafis and with the Ikhwan and everybody else. And it's extremely important that we respect each other. and not to resort to violence to sort out our issues. I also believe that there is no more place in Libya for secret societies or parties, that everybody should be transparent about their membership of whatever party, and that we should be very open about our allegiances. I'm telling you exactly what my allegiances are. I am a Sanusi in Tariqa, and I am a Maliki and an Ash'ari. Now, regarding the Islamic Code Society, it does survive. The executive team appointed a 5-member caretaker team to make sure that it does not collapse. And they're preserving the manuscripts and the books and the college, and also making sure that it functions, because it has investments and it also has many branches in Africa and so on. And there are various proposals on what to do with this organization. I think the most likely scenario is that it will be changed into a university along the line of the old Muhammad bin Ali Sanusi University, teaching basically mainstream Islam. And I don't think that the resources should be wasted. It was doing some good work, but it was also doing some bad work as well, which will of course stop. Now, regarding youth and feeling that the elderly have jumped, I think I agree with you. And this there isn't worse feeling than being cheated. You know, you'd be willing to give if you were asked nicely, but if I cheat you out of anything, then you'll feel very hurt and angry. And the anger and the frustration is very dangerous. And I believe that we have miserably failed to include the youth in the government and in the council. There are some token representations, but they're not enough. The same holds for women, by the way. I don't think there is enough women representation. And I think these are two major weaknesses of the performance of the National Transitional Council, which should be rectified. But again, I believe that the most dangerous thing for democracy is the very huge amount of money that can now be used to win elections, and the lack of funding for young people who need training and who need organizational skills to be able to pull together campaigns so that they can win elections. You know? Now, regarding the arms and what to do about them, as I say, the fact that the arms are well distributed has contributed to stability to some extent. I know this is a weird opinion, but the dangerous trend is the arms trade across borders and the sneaking of these arms to other areas. So it is a regional threat. The government is doing its utmost to try and gather these arms. The response has been very weak. I believe part of the reason for the weakness of response is the not very intelligent idea of dishing out monthly payments to so-called revolutionaries or Tuareg, who have inflated in numbers over the past weeks. And we have a very large number of them. And the idea of promising them 500 dinars a month is very bad. I think it's bad for the dignity of the Libyan youth who fought, not for money, but for dignity and freedom of their country. And it's also making it not worth one's while to give up one's arms. I think a buyback program would have been much more intelligent, and perhaps a trade option of giving apartments if you give up heavy weapons, and giving business tools and equipment. If you're giving light weaponry, might be a good way of jump-starting the economy and small businesses instead of just continuing to dish out money monthly. But these ideas are some of the ideas being discussed. The government is getting the help of some international advisors, including UN agencies, on how to deal with it, and they're doing their utmost. But it is a difficult situation. And once, it is very strange, once a young person gets attached to a gun and the high of feeling empowered, especially after years of oppression, it's psychologically difficult to give this up. But I've seen young people, and I'm honored to know them, who would refuse to carry guns once liberation happened, precisely because they feel that it's wrong to do that there is no more legitimate reason to fight. So let us pray for the best and do our utmost to disarm, but it's going to take some time.
Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I know a number of you want to speak, but we have another group coming in here at 7, so I've got time for one more question. And we did highlight the need for better representation of young people, particularly young women. So the last word goes to you.
I'm Ushba Al-Ain. I'm an undergraduate student at Health International Business School. And I was surprised by how centralized your speech lecture was.
I would like to know that how affected is the post-war or post-Gaddafi Libya going to be by foreign nations, and by foreign I mean foreign organizations, mostly Western. How important are the Western values going to be in this new democracy? For example, I don't know, like the Americans or the United Nations or France or even United Kingdom, because in Arab it's almost, if not much, but it's still quite relative, and UAE helping is, you could say, the same thing, the same rules. But how affected or how is the new Libya going to be? Is it going to be hugely affected by the Western values or not at all?
It's difficult to predict, but I can tell you this. Libya is about the only country in the region where the flags of Western countries are flown in the main squares of liberation. I mean, with pride, actually. I mean, it's and I believe that because of that, Libya is a unique opportunity to build up a mature relationship between equals and who mutually respect and help each other. And I believe it can be a lighthouse for Western. You see, the problem with when you say Western, Eastern, it doesn't. I mean, it's weird. Like you say, Western Muslim, Western Arab. One is geography, and the other one is religion. It's kind of strangely. So I don't like these polarities. But what I can tell you is that there isn't an anti-Western sentiment in Libya. On the contrary, there is great appreciation for the work that was done by many countries, including Western countries, in helping the Libyan people. Had it not been for NATO's intervention, Benghazi would have been wiped out. This is documented. Just to give you an idea, the line of heavy artillery and machinery that was coming to Benghazi extended kilometers. It was like a vast attack. And it is most unfortunate that force had to be used to stop the slaughter, but it was something that I think the Libyan people do appreciate. I don't speak in the name of the Libyan people, but my impression is that I don't hear like anti-Western things. However, I do hear Libyans being very careful and cherishing their sovereignty. And they will not accept intervention in Libyan sovereignty by anyone, Arab or non-Arab. And even some helpful Arab countries came under a lot of criticism because of what was seen as dabbling into internal politics. So people have to be careful to respect that sovereignty. I believe the United Nations has to play a leading role in consolidating the help that we're getting. First, I think we should have a unified needs assessment with UN help, and then people who want to help or countries that want to help can map what they can offer to the needs assessment. And this is something that we've discussed with Mr. Ian Martin and other people from the UN, and I believe it's the way to go forward. We are doing the best we can with this alignment. When I was coordinating the stabilization team operations, we were working very closely. Then there was a little bit of a gap because of the shifts in governance. But now there's been workshops for aligning this international effort. And I believe the UN should be the leader of this alignment in terms of and being the partner in discussion with the Libyan government, so that you don't have an infinite lineup of people who want to help in a repetitive way, so that we can maybe divide the kinds of help accordingly and align it properly. So I really believe that in Libya, a very mature relationship between a Muslim country, an Arab country, and Western countries can develop. Historically, Libya had French embassies and consulates and British embassies going way back, centuries, And it's a very cosmopolitan place, Had trade with Venice and Napoli. So I believe that it can play a very important role in greater and better relationships, which again should be based on mutual respect and mutual compassion and love in God. And as a theologian, it's good to end that way.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being such a good audience. I want to thank you all for the good questions you asked. I'm very happy so many of you came, including people who've taken a courageous stand for freedom in Libya. But most of all, I want you to join with me in thanking Dr. Aref Nayed. He's travelled a long way, he's worked very, very hard. He's been, as I said, he would be extremely frank and honest with you. It's my personal hope that the government keeps refusing to accept his resignation, because I don't think you'll find this kind of objective voice is very, very common in any government. Let us all wish Libya well. Let us thank our speaker for this evening.